So, what Dean Crawford asked us to do in ours is give an overview of the budget model. This group, it's called the Budget Model Work Group. It actually spawned off another committee that was formed last year by the Provost Billingsley at that time to look at sort of the Huron revenue model that was kind of been worked on at that time, and this group then was charged by Provost Bean to really concentrate on developing really a new model rather than just a kind of a budget attribution model that we were looking at that time. So I'll just kind of maybe give you a little overview of budget models and kind of see where we've kind of gone with this, and then I'll kind of go into the details of the budget model that were actually recommended to the Provost, so you can kind of get a sense of where we're going with it. So just to give you an idea of the committee membership, Jim Biggany and myself are the co-chairs, and so we have a group of people that represent really all the units across campus. I'm sorry. We have people from HSC, we've done that, but every unit is represented here on this group, including students and staff. And it was the intent of the Provost to make sure that there was broad representation in this group as we kind of work through our models. And so we have some deans, we have some department chairs, and we have regular faculty and all that. So, what I'm going to try to do today is to talk about, number one, is to maybe just review some budget models, where the school was at prior to coming to this point in time, and what were the advantages and disadvantages of that model, and then where we're going with this model right now. So then my second goal is to explain the model that the committee has recommended to the Provost. So what did we do during 2019? Well, we had developed guiding principles back there to, every university as it's gone through a budget change has gone by certain milestones or core values that it wants to stick by. And you'll see in a second. We developed these last year. We then modified them this year. I'll kind of show you where we're at with those principles so you can see what we were using as a framework in our thinking as we were going about our discussions. We agreed on a framework that we will use credit our tuition allocation essentially to incentivize units across campuses, to give units a way of looking at how they could raise revenue to their unit by increasing credit hours, which is what it's all about. Revenue comes to the university either through endowments, gifts, clinical income, or tuition. And clearly, a lot of units, it's only through tuition. And so what we want to do is to make sure we have a model that will give folks a sense within their units of how much will come back to the unit so that they can plan appropriately for the resources that they may need to expand it. Like law school, I'm from a professional school where really my numbers are capped. I can't grow my numbers in a capacity perspective. So I look at other ways to raise my revenue. But this is at least something that was the beginning of a complete budget model. It's just a part of the story, but a story to be developed, okay? So these, I'm sorry, the font is very small here, but these were our guiding principles. I'll just say them. It was commit to a conversion from a centralized to a decentralized approach to budgeting, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about this when we review budget models and what the difference is. Keep an academic focus front and center, because we're here for students, and student success, as our strategic plan talks about. We wanted to expand incentive opportunities. We wanted to analyze via common information systems and metrics. We do know that, and Rick will be the first to admit this, that we have not had a good history of being transparent in our budgetary process, and we're not very clear about true costs across the campus for the different units. And what we're committing to do as we go forward is to commit to transparency as we move forward. And as you'll see with this is pretty transparent what you're going to see. We want to support responsibility and authority for end goals, again, by giving units and deans essentially the tools to make capital, to generate revenue, that we're giving the tools back to the units, and that will incentivize them and help them as they carry out their mission. We want to make sure we allocate resources to accomplish institutional goals. One of the things that we have now is, of course, a new strategic plan. And there's got to be a commitment that we have some way of supporting that, right? So some money has to go centrally to support those initiatives as we move forward on those for the sake of the university. We want to communicate broadly and act timely. So again, this is part of this process here. I wanted to come here and certainly take the opportunity to talk to you about the budget model. I am going before the Faculty Senate in December, and also the plan is that I'll go before Staff Senate and communicate this as well. Align incentives with the University Strategic Plan, like I said, and then recognize institutional barriers and changing budget models. We do know that we have a budget model that has been in place for a long time. We also do know that we all have institutional barriers that make us not maybe act as nimbly as we'd like. We also know that with programs, we have tenured professors sometimes in those programs, and that's something you just can't change overnight. And so we do realize that and recognize that there is a sense that this is a big picture thing, and that we do have to make sure that as we move forward with this model, we educate people to those barriers, we try to see what those barriers are, and give units time to move around those barriers. So, again, just going back to now talking about budget models, historically, there has been universities across the country that have moved to different budget models. Minnesota moved to an RCM type system, Iowa has moved to an RCM type system, University of Florida has moved to an RCM type system. So, a lot of campuses across the university or across the country are having these conversations. And I think that, one of the things that, from certainly what work we've done is that as we looked at them, is that there's no single budget model that works the same for everybody. We all have different, institutional values, we have different models that have been in place. And so, there's no one right model, and there's no one model that everybody's going to, because if you look at those universities, they're all very different as well. And even though they may say that they're an RCM, they may not be an RCM, they may be a hybrid of that. So, they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and I'm going to review them for you, just for your educational purposes, a backdrop to it. And again, the bottom line is that, whatever model you come up with, it's really the people who make the decisions, the ones that are going to make it work or not. So you typically have any model, and again, if the provost is not willing to sign on, or the president is not willing to sign on, or the dean is not willing to sign on, then certainly these models certainly don't thrive or flourish no matter what we got. So the spectrum of budget models is we have one type which is called an incremental budget model. And this is the budget model that we've had at the University of Louisville for a long time. And essentially what it is that, we got our budget from last year and they gave it to you again. And if you had a cut from state appropriations, then you got a cut on that portion of it, and so you got a cut. If you sort of had an elevation in state appropriations, which is very few and far between states that are getting that, then you might get a bump, or if the university was doing well, or if you argued your case with the provost, maybe they'd bump it up. But it's really a budget model that's based on history. There's nothing strategic about it. It's kind of like, well, whatever you got before, you must be able to do okay with that. We'll give it to you again, and carry on the road. The nice thing about that is, of course, it gives us a little bit of sense of security. We know that we're not going to have a draconian type of shift, maybe. We're not going to be held accountable for what we're doing, but also we can grow. I mean, if I don't have any money or any reason to grow my activities, this model doesn't recognize that or reward it, okay? So it allows for high-level strategic input from in priority setting. It does reduce accountability for yearly expenditures. So these are kind of sort of the spectrum of the pros and cons of it. A zero-based budget model would be as if you got zero every year, and you had to go and make an argument of why you wanted the money that you needed to teach the course loads that you're teaching. And so you kind of literally start from scratch. You have to come in and make your case before a committee, just like they do in Congress, or some types of departmental budgets that are put together. And essentially, you need a lot of data for that. We need a lot of data about what my true costs are. This is what IT charges me. This is what the student in my class costs. We really don't have all of that type of good data. There was a lot of support in our group to move to some point. Wow, I won't touch the screen anymore.
It's a touch screen.
Yeah, indeed it is.
Obviously.
You had me there. Again, this is something that as a group, and Enid was on this group last year before Lars joined, we talked about this. Yeah, we think units need to justify why they have that budget. What are the reasons why they have it? And so that's a conversation we've had. We're not doing it now, but it's something that we're going to talk about later on. There's things called performance-based budget models where, essentially you can base a budget based on what metrics you want to increase. You could say, well, I want to have more PhD students within a college, or I want more research dollars. Then you can incentivize around that. And those models are out there. Again, it's based on quality. Again, a lot of data is needed. You're looking at graduation rates, maybe timely graduation. And then we have what's called an activity-based budget model, which is essentially allocating funding based on a specific activity. Now, in our case, we're actually proposing kind of like an activity-based budget model. We're talking about increasing tuition in hours. And so whether it's more hours or more students, probably more students, right? That would then generate revenue back to the unit. So an RCM model is essentially everything you make, you keep, but then you have to pay taxes. And so the university determines a tax. And that's kind of what an RCM model in a nutshell is, okay? Again, a lot of places have gone to something like that. A lot of them haven't. Some have gone and come back. I think the UK were moving right on the RCM route and then kind of pull back from it. And we're not proposing an RCM model right now, but just to kind of give you a perspective of how they all fit on this chart. So over here, you kind of have allocation method. And so then you have precedent, and then you have formulaic, and then you have centralized and decentralized. You can see the RCM is kind of way over on the decentralized formulaic type of budget model. Incremental is kind of over on sort of the, it's kind of low down, it's all precedent, and it's sort of somewhere in between centralized and decentralized. I mean, the local unit still has a lot of autonomy, but really it's kind of not one that gives you a lot of, sort of flexibility. So the budget concept that we went into, the overview of it, is that we clearly know that our budget model is not working for us. We have budget issues, we have budget deficits, we have cut in state appropriations. And so what we want to try to do is to create activity, right, to grow revenue streams. And so the incremental budget model that we had didn't consistently promote or reward academic units for instructing more students or teaching more credit hours. It certainly did not allow units to provide leadership and mechanical means to try to move the needle on it. And what we want to do is to give levers for the deans to work with, and the units and the programs and the chairs to work with as they look about trying to generate ways to bring money back to the unit. And so we looked and we had talked about different methods, and one of the things that we knew we had good data on was hours taught in this university. We have excellent data on who's teaching what, where, what the credit hours are, what the enrollments are. So there was an example of where we knew we had good data, and we also knew that's where kind of the rubber hits the road when you look at revenue. And we'll see tables here in a second, and you'll see the law school there, and the dental school, and all the other schools that are related to that. So what we did was we looked at the allocation of tuition revenues based on credit hours as directed by a unit. And so we wanted to come up with a percentage number that would be allocated back to the unit for where the credit hours was either instructed or was the area of where the student was coming from. Because we clearly have examples of where students enroll, they might be enrolled in one college, but their instruction is occurring in another college. And so there's a lot of examples out there that we have to think about as we were kind of developing this model. But what we want to do is to get that tuition revenue back to the unit where it belongs. Now, we also know that if you just take tuition revenue on its own, it doesn't pay all the bills in the unit, okay? And so every unit across campus has what we call a budget subsidy amount. And that's the amount that essentially is the gap between the tuition right now of what is coming in and what you're actually getting in your budget by the provost to operate on for the year. And again, we'll look at the table in a second and it'll make a little bit more sense. This year in the fall, what we wanted to do is we kind of divided our work into 4 parts. And so part 1 was July to October, and was to kind of operationalize the model that I'm going to show you. We talked about scenarios of where maybe the model might have a flaw in it, and we reviewed sort of an initial recommendation that we made to the provost in the spring of last year, which she approved, which was then passed to the president's executive cabinet approved. So what we did in the fall was we reviewed the recommendation, and we took feedback from different units about anomalies that might exist within them as regards credit hour allocation. For instance, for those students who take 12 hours or more, they do not get charged tuition. We also have discounts for veterans. We have other high school students that attend campus who don't pay the tuition. How would we account for those type of anomalies? We have courses that are being taught primarily by one college for students of another college. Again, how would these scenarios work out in this model? Part two, which is what our work is beginning in a week, is to actually take the numbers that we got from the close of year 2018-2019. So, we finished out the financial year 2019 in the end of June, is we wanted to take the data from that, and as we move forward, plug it into this model. We used last year's data. So what I'm showing you on the table is actually data based on 2018 numbers, okay? So that kind of gives you an idea of the scope of work. So, again, I apologize. If you want to come forward and look at this, because if I had known the screen was that small, I would have probably printed this out. If you look at law right now, and this is the example of law, your budget, let's see here, I'll make sure that the right area here. Your budget for 2018 was $10,484,000, okay? We developed over here on the screen an allocation method of the hours that were taught in law as it relates to undergraduate, graduate, and professional. And we'll go through each of these categories, how we came up with these rates. But what we did was we accounted 70% of the undergraduate rate goes back to the college, if it's an undergraduate. If it's a graduate, it's 75%, okay? If it's a professional allocation, it's 85% goes back to the unit. Now, the reason why there was differences, and we talked about these, is because a lot of times the expense associated with these levels is more, okay? So when we look at law and we factor in essentially what you made, I'm going to have to follow across here. Essentially, with the model, when you added revenue allocation and fees, you came up with $7,437,000, okay? And over here, the highlighted part is, it says $3,046,000, which is your budget subsidy amount, because that's the amount that we essentially, when we ran the model, was to bring you back to where you started, okay? And so every unit, with two exceptions, has a budget subsidy amount in the negative, okay? And that's just because, we can come up with whatever model we want, and it changes the number, but it could either go up or down, but everybody is going to be either in a negative or plus. But what we wanted to do was to develop a model that would be the fairest, to give the most back to the unit, and then we'll talk about that budget subsidy allocation as we move forward. Okay, are you with me so far? No, you're not with me anyway.
Wait, is there any way we could just blow up just this one screen so people can see it?
No. Great question.
I have this document, I can show it to you.
Doable.
I can send it.
Lars has a copy of the sheet,
Yeah.
and maybe he can kind of go through that with you and talk about it and more of that. I'll kind of give you the overview of it and what's going to happen as we go forward, because a lot of discussion about in every unit is, well, what is this budget subsidy allocation? How is that going to be handled, okay? Everybody wants levers to grow, but we also know that if some people are winning, and where's the money to pay the winners if we don't have the model working well, okay? So there's got to be sort of balance between gathering money and also making sure that we have the ability to pay the units that are growing, okay? So we'll kind of talk a little bit about how we're going to handle this later on. So the concept, let me get that, I'll kind of go through the categories a little bit. So for undergraduate tuition rate, 70% of the resident undergraduate rate less mandatory fees multiplied by the number of credit hours instructed in instruction. So that goes back to the unit of instruction. For the undergraduate, it goes back to the unit of instruction, 70% less mandatory fees. As tuition rates increase, so would the dollar amount allocated to the unit for each credit hour instructed. Allocations for students who pay less than the resident tuition rate, for example, military, dual credit, would be still calculated at the 70% rate. Because we felt like, well, if we're giving away free stuff, the teachers are still teaching it, the salaries still need to be paid, the expenses still need to be paid. Maybe we should be looking at why we're doing that, okay? But the unit should get credit for the hours that they're taught, whether they're actually being collected for that group. And when we looked at the data, the actual numbers involved was very, very low, okay? We also had situations that came up, well, what about inter-unit cross-listed courses? How would they be managed? And we thought that because they're specific to, say, maybe law and business, that it's better for those specific examples to be dealt with by the Dean of the Law and Business School, because they've had the relationship. There's no point in a central committee trying to regulate every nuance of everything. We want to give a lot of autonomy for agreements to be done. We also want to promote interdisciplinary behavior, and that goes back to some state performance funding that we'll talk about later on. International students will be calculated at the undergraduate tuition rate. Okay, so that's the undergraduate tuition rate. So 70% of whatever you make goes back to where it's taught. At the graduate level, it's 75%, and it's allocated to the student's home unit. Okay? Assuming, again, in most instances, because it's graduate, it really is at the home unit. If we have an anomaly where there's expenses being borne by another unit, that will obviously be looked at, because we want it to go back to where the expense is at, okay? And we want to give colleges the revenue that they get from bringing students in that they recruited. So courses taught by one school exclusively for another. It kind of talks about cross-listed things, just like I talked about for undergraduate, okay? So same thing, units are expected to deal with those and will be discussed. And then professional tuition allocation, 85% goes back as mandatory fees to the student's home unit. The committee reached a consensus during the fall that all doctoral students should fall into this category. So originally we had it that it was just medicine and dentistry and law, but then we also included PhD students and nurse practitioners, anybody who had a terminal doctoral degree was included in that. So this budget subsidy allocation, this was the amount that we all have to sort of make what we started, because we wanted whatever we do to be a period of hold harmless, okay? We can't have units where suddenly their budget's cut from under them because we've moved to any type of model and they have no time to react to that model and see the model. So what we wanted to do is to give levers for folks to see ahead of time of how you can move the revenue side within your unit. The other thing that the Vice President for Finance, Dan Durbin, allowed is for a long time, the longest time ever, if we didn't spend our budget, it didn't carry over. And what he wanted to do was that this year, as well as this lever, the additional lever would be that if you have carryover, you would keep 50% of it, and you would keep that moving forward. So it's to give an incentive to units to try to curtail costs. You know, if you save money, then you get 50% of it, and you can carry it over, and it can be carried over indefinitely. You don't have to have a certain time that is expensed out. Okay. So the budget subsidy allocation is really what we're talking about, the at-risk amount. Okay, because this is money that you're being given as a unit to support the activities that you do. And you may have funds from other areas that are coming in to support that, or you may not, okay? So this is at least to get this down on paper. And so to say, for instance, this year, this is a good example of a year, we actually had enrollment was slightly down, but yet 2 colleges were up, okay? Very small amount. If we didn't change the budget subsidy allocation amount, then where would the money come from to reward them, right? So we have to have a period where that budget subsidy allocation has to be discussed and has to be, it's at risk. I mean, there is an amount of it that's at risk. So we're giving people a sense of where you're at with the budget, and where the deans should be at with their planning about trying to grow activities that bring money in that may offset that budget subsidy amount. So one of the things we recommended with this budget subsidy allocation is that deans should be allowed to go to a committee to talk about that budget subsidy allocation. So there has been a separate committee that's been formed that will, among other things, look at sort of that budget subsidy amount. And deans will come there with their budgets for the year and say, you know, this is what we need because we have accreditation requirements. We have faculty that need to be in this course if we're going to continue to offer the course. We also know that if a course is being offered and there's no enrollment or low enrollment, then the question is, why are we offering that course? Or is there a plan to move that course out of existence, essentially, or what is the purpose of it? So these are the type of conversations that have to go on that are a little bit more transparent than some of the conversations, I guess, that have happened in the past. So this is kind of, we also understand that you can't cut a budget or a budget subsidy amount because there are, like I said, barriers to it. There are institutional barriers related to employment, to contracts, to enrollment. And so what we're proposing is that no more than 1% of this be at risk of a budget subsidy allocation as we go forward. So again, it's giving people tools to grow, but it's also giving you sort of a sense that, well, the budgeted subsidy allocation is basically a benefit. It's an amount that's being paid to help you, but we've got to figure out better ways to help ourselves if, as a university, we want to continue to survive. I mean, that's just the nature of the financial thing. We've talked about a state performance budget model. You know, we do get funds based on state performance. The amount of money is based on a small amount of incremental change, so the committee felt like that the provost should keep that amount because the dollars are small and she needs money to support her initiatives as relates to the strategic plan. Because when you look at the ACC, the amount of budget that our provost has is actually the smallest amount of any provost within the ACC. We also felt that this policy should be reviewed. If there were changes in that amount, if it became a lot higher, then we should look at that. You know, and the committee's role is to continue on to make alterations to this model as we see inequities or we see problems with it. It's not a done deal. This is sort of an evolving model that we want to see implemented and see work and then modify it as we see problems with it. We have outstanding items on it, and I kind of listed them up there. Some of it I alluded to is what happens if, you know, the university overall is down and then units grow. How do we pay that unit if we don't have the money? Because this is where all the money comes from. So that big sheet I showed you, it essentially amounts to $250 million in revenue. And so if that total amount doesn't change, if 1 or 2 units are doing, then where does that come from? Well, it comes from that budget subsidy allocation. You know, it comes from the fact that somebody may have to readjust their budget subsidy allocation. We talked about when would this budget model work. So what we envision is that in the spring of 2020, we're actually now entering in numbers for the year that closed out in 2019, and we're now building budget models for each unit. So Rick's office here will be providing that data eventually to the units, and then the deans will come with these numbers to this committee and talk about their budget for 2020 to 2021. So that's the budget that will start July 1, 2020, that will go through June 30th, 2021. I'm sorry I rushed through a lot of it. Rick, was there anything I missed you can think of that you want to add to it? So I know it's a lot of information, and I apologize. And I think, Lars, you will get to maybe the
I'll
data.
See.
Yes.
So.
What I see, and I understand the need to do this, and money is tight and so on, but what I'm always frustrated with when I look at these kinds of models is they don't include any discussion of academic units and other contributions they make that they don't get tuition or grants. For example, I just looked at, did a quick look at the governor's new transition team. The number of lawyers, several of them are The alums of ours who have given money to this university that have not been given back to this unit. I know the history behind that. But that doesn't get, we produce people who are generous to the university, to the community. And if the law school's tuition revenue doesn't justify kind of keeping it at the quality that is important to maintain, we risk losing that. And it's a longer term investment. It's not a short-term turnaround, but I worry about that. It also does not value what the university purports to value, and I believe it values, which is community engagement, which is not revenue producing, which is diversity, which is not revenue producing. But if those things matter, then if we are to work toward this model, I think those are going to be clashing.
These are great points, and these are the same worries that we all have, believe me, and what came up in our discussions. And by no means was the budget subsidy allocation meant to place value on a unit, whether you were up or down by $1 million or 10 million. Because it goes to your very point, is that we know that there are strategic initiatives at the university. There is priorities that the university has set. That's the arguments that your dean will be charged to make as he goes to
But I
to the
hear,
provost.
I've been told, provost said, no money, not
Right.
a single
Well,
cent.
the provost,
And so,
well,
what's
the
the
reality
deal
is,
doing to?
but the provost doesn't have any money. I mean, the reality is that there is no money. You know, there was a deficit last year that was plugged. And so I think there's a kind of an idea that there's money there. There is no money. And so, you know, we all have to be stewards of what we have. And I mean, you
But
know,
who is the dean making their case to, or what?
the provost, the president, and a committee that will actually sit down and talk about the budget for the fiscal year next year as regards
So
how
it wouldn't
it is.
be, a separate fund would be
Yeah, so I mean, you know, the provost is gonna have strategic initiatives, right? And there's going to be a strategic plan, there are funds in there. And you can have a situation like we're in music, the same thing, you know, revenue side, the value it brings to the university, totally get it. That's not our job, is to make determinations on that. What we wanna do is to make sure that we have levers in there for folks to be able to manipulate that and actually get a return on it. But I totally get your point, I understand, completely.
Cedric, Cedric.
Well, just a comment, it always makes me a little nervous when we talk in the budget context about winners and losers. That really, was disconcerting, but I guess that's where we are. My question is, on the chart that you had, we had, the law school budget at 10 million, then you had revenue at 7 million, so are you saying the provost gives us 3 million, and that is the budget subsidy amount? That's the way it works?
Yeah.
And so what are we trying to do with the budget subsidy amount? That's what I'm.
Yeah, and I think that's the question going forward, is, you know, how does it change? And again, it's not to put a value on it, you know, because some will never make that amount up. And you have to either have a law school or you don't have a law school, because there are accreditation standards, there are things that you have to have in place. I totally understand that. And that's not what we're trying to do, is we wanna have a transparent model that people can see that are there ways that you can actually grow from within, you know, and how much can a cut occur? That's why we limited it to a 1% at most at risk. But clearly, a challenge for all of us that we have in dentistry is the same thing. You know, I have got one of the most expensive educational models in dentistry is the faculty-student ratio we have. It's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge for us, and will continue to be a challenge for us.
So I was gonna follow up on, as you mentioned, the point about winners and losers, because in order to have winners, there have to be losers, and that's like the.
Well, I guess not necessarily, but
I hope not.
no.
But.
We certainly hope not.
I would like it to be different,
Right.
but, if the goal is to create funds available to those who are bringing in more tuition, creating new programs, that has to come from reductions in subsidies, right, to the units. And so we're already starting off with only 85% of our budget. The subsidy gets us to 100%, but over time that will be reduced.
No, not necessarily. I mean, as you teach more courses, that revenue is coming back to you in addition to whatever you have.
But like at the school, there are barriers to that.
Right.
You know, and accreditation is one of them, and
Right.
we face significant barriers to doing that, and which include, our statistics in terms of
Right.
US News and World Report rankings. So there are other factors that affect our ability to bring in more tuition, and in smaller units, perhaps like the Dental school, certainly like the music school, there's, you know, there are limits to what
Yeah.
we can do.
Yeah.
And so we will have to suffer through likely budget cuts without the same opportunities that other units might have to increase their budgets, to bring in more students,
Right.
to create new programs. We're not the business school, they can just, you know, start new programs all the time. We have to go through the
Sure.
accreditation process too.
Well, I think to your point, I mean, that's what the provost does need dollars essentially, right, to make those determinations. Because it could be like in the case of law, you know, they can't grow. Physically, your building is the size it is, and the same for dental school. What we did this year is we actually took more out-of-state residents because we were able to get more tuition through that. You know, I'm looking at a model where I might start an international dentist program because revenue from that you can charge higher. So I know I'm trapped in my enrollment, so I'm kind of looking at ways I can operate within my enrollment to grow. And that's all I can do. And I may reach a point where I can't do any more. Just like you in the law school, there's only so much you can do. And again, I guess I retract my winners and losers statement because at the end of the day, it is not about whether that budget subsidy allocation is automatically cut. It's just that there has to be a conversation that has to go on with each unit, with each provost to determine what the value is to the university.
Alright, so I have, so Ariana, John, Tom, and Will on the call, so Ariana.
Hi, I'm Ariana. Is the 1% at risk of the budget subsidy or of the overall budget?
It's of the budget subsidy allocation.
No, it's of the overall.
Oh, I'm sorry, the overall, yeah.
1% of the overall, and then did you
Yes.
say?
So for us, it would be about a,
Right, yeah, because for some units it would have been a tiny amount and other units it would have been.
And did you say that 50% of the carryover is going to be taken back?
Yes, as opposed to 100%.
Because I swear we were sitting in this room and somebody came and promised us that we would retain 100% of the carryover.
Let me add to that. So, Dan, last year, for fiscal year 19, he wanted to make sure that the audit, the sweeping that occurred at the prior end of fiscal year 17 and 18 did not occur. So what he went forward with is this 50% return. And so that's happening for 19. 20, we're running into this, we're rolling out the new budget model, and we're still living in that gain share area, so that'll all be worked out this year. But where the budget model goes, and I think this is one of the really the neatest features of the budget model, the allocations happen up front. So if in that model, right, whatever revenue is generated based upon that, if law school is 85% of the revenue that goes back to the school, that stays with the school. It doesn't go anywhere at the end of the year. So in other words, if you spend less than what the allocation is, the dollars stay with the school once the model's in place. So that gain share conversation, which I think is something that's driven a lot of people and made them upset, understandably so, it's going to stay with the school. So that's where
We're headed.
that's where we're at.
So one more substantive question perhaps. Would it be feasible or doable or something that the university should be thinking about that we just shut down and bus everybody to Frankfurt for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Because it seems that the root of the problem is that the educational system is not being funded. And the system we had before that was stable wasn't stable because it was always a cut, and cuts always incentivize people to grow their programs. So we've been incentivized for over a decade. We've been brainstorming about how to grow our programs, and so maybe it's time for the university to devote some of the limited resources we have to some kind of public campaign to have education funded.
Well, I think today we have a conference in Frankfurt with Edie Vendapudi, and I know that Karen Durbin is talking before the finance committee about a budget for the HSC. I mean, I think part of the issue there, of course, is the state's financial position. seen state
Yeah, you
appropriation.
have to raise taxes, right?
Right.
To start educating people.
Yeah, that requires a change of legislators apparently for that to happen, believe me. I think we're down to 130 million, give some change of state appropriations right now, which is approximately 11% of our entire budget. I think that is declined from what, in the mid-20s, probably, so we've seen essentially 100 to 150 million disappear off our books. And that's been over a series of governors, obviously different parties too. And I think the reality is, it is what we're dealing with. But I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, all of us are in this room are for education, and we think the state's goals should be supported more than they are. But I also realize that they don't have a nickel, it seems like, from their pension fund too. So realistically, I guess we can only do what we do, but do all the things you suggest. I mean, fight for our cause with our legislators.
Right now, I have John, Tom, Willa, Jim, and I want to be cognizant of the fact that there are a couple of things left on the agenda. This is a very important issue, but I also think I would hate for us not to get to all the other items that are on there. So I'll take these questions and then we can come back and see if we want to.
Just a comment and a question that I hope will be a quick question. The comment is, I've been at U of L for 32 years, and this is a very new era. But I say that in a positive way. I can't thank you enough for being as transparent as you've been with it. That's something very, very new to U of L. Rick, you and I have had conversations before on the grant thing. I really do appreciate that. I mean, we can see what's happening. I really think that's a very positive change. The question is, and this doesn't relate that much to the law school, how is external grant money treated in this? So if we were to get $1 million grant in the law school, how does that factor into the budget?
We haven't got to the complete total budget approach right now, but right now it's flowing right back to the unit.
Nothing changed.
Nothing changed in that model.
Okay.
Yeah. We have to make revenue too, which is the only thing that keeps us above board. And again, that's stays.
So no change in the
Yeah, so
overhead
this is not a complete
okay.
budget model, this is just one piece of it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So if you want to get sort of technical, this is just dealing with the general fund portion of your budget. The non-general fund portion, which is endowments and gifts and grants, nothing changes.
Okay.
It's not factoring into this, but as Dean Bradley showed, like one of the first slides, that's a conversation that this work group is supposed to get to, I think, like next summer. I mean, it's a big sort of move if we actually go into all funds budget model.
Tom?
One thing seems pretty clear, and that is the responsibility for doing fiscal management is being shifted back a lot to the units. What plans, if any, do you have to support the units in helping them manage to see if they're moving down the right path at the right speed? So
Yeah,
Well,
that's
so,
EAB,
yeah, there are a couple of tools, a couple of platforms, software platforms that we have rolled out. EAB is one of them, it's Academic Performance Solutions. It's something that the deans and the LFOs have been trained on. But there's also another conversation that's ongoing with the CFO, Dan Durbin, and the deans about providing additional support from the finance areas that report up to Dan to all the academic units. So that's well understood, and from a university perspective, we realize that if the academic units do well, the university does well, and there has to be that sufficient support that's provided. So,
and so you're working on it, but right now there's no specific plan about what reports we would have.
internally?
Yes, that would be generated outside of this unit, and what we are going to have to do inside the unit.
sure, yeah. All that's going to be worked out over the
Yeah,
next-
the new platform, they realized that we didn't have enough real-time reporting at the unit level. I mean, when I came as dean, I look at 3 accounts, and everything we were looking at, the report was different, And so right now, actually, when Dan Durbin first came here, he was actually the Assistant Vice President of Finance at HSC, and he started to implement some of the changes that are actually going on right now. So now, I actually have much better recording of all my real-time numbers, and so I know every week I sit with my finance team and we're reviewing the numbers, and it's kind of real-time data, and so allowing me to make changes based on what I'm seeing.
Are those reports something that you generate internally in the dental school, or is that provided to you?
It's provided through HSC, through the office of the Assistant Vice President for Finance over there. They have where monies come in, collected, and then put into, credited to accounts, and that we have access to.
I've talked to the dean, and if there are any reports that you all want, I'd be happy to help make sure that you get that information.
Will?
Question I have, there are, obviously you have to hear about all these units that generate revenue, but on campus there's a lot of units that don't generate revenue. I'm thinking IT, physical plant, the library, others. What, IT generate, that's exactly the point I was making. IT generates revenue by charging us for every time they show up. What I don't want to, you haven't mentioned that, but I don't want to get to the situation where every time we need that light change, it's signed up.
Believe me, this is not the first time I've heard this. We've actually talked about this at length, because if you go back to the RCM model, that's actually one where IT would have to justify, right, every expense, because every revenue would go back to the unit, and then the unit would say, well, I'm gonna, contract with IT to provide support, and I'm gonna pay you, and it's a negotiation. We're not at that level right now, because we really don't know, IT's total costs and total value, shall we say, and I don't want to put value on it. But part of this committee that's going to look at the budget subsidy allocation, there are actually 3 separate committees. And we've also asked that central committee review central costs and how they're developed and how they are justifying them and what service they are part of it. So again, as we move to a total budget model, you're absolutely right. All those questions have to come in, is what is the value I'm getting for this amount? Because we've seen across the United States, some universities have contracted out their IT. They've gotten rid of their IT departments and contracted out their housekeeping. Yeah. Now some of them have come back because what they got was different than what they wanted, right? So again, believe me, that's a conversation we've talked about, and we've all complained about it, and I'm sorry, IT always comes in for the blame because...
that's a perfect segue to my question, which is how much analysis of expenses is going into this? Because, for example, my department, IT for law school, my S&E budget is $63,000 a year. 2/3 of that goes out the door in July to IT for voice and data. So every year when the dean has to go to the provost to justify whatever our subsidy needs to be in a particular year, at this point 15%, or $3 million. Some of that is he needs to go to the provost and ask, can I have enough money to keep the lights on, literally. That just seems silly.
No, I do think that is a conversation that has to happen about central costs and how they're justified, and units are very concerned about that. It's across the units.
Oh, I had a question about, so there's a lot of committees in this framework and a lot of oversight on the numbers, but the piece that I'm wondering about is what type of oversight or monitoring is there going to be to the sort of non-economic collateral consequences of this model, right? Whether there are going to be secondary effects of this. So, I'm thinking here at this unit, right? It seems like every time we do a national search, it would be cheaper to just do a local search. If you're on admissions, if you could fill seats with 160 privileged students who can pay their way, very economical, but that's missing so many other values in the model. Sure. And so, what efforts are underway to monitor, quality, to monitor rankings, to monitor attrition, to monitor diversity, to monitor morale as this model shakes itself out?
Yeah, and and I think these are great questions, and I think, to be honest, these are questions that have to be asked internally, because I know I'm asking them about myself, about my program, and how do I keep the strength of the student that I want? How am I getting those underrepresented minorities? And I'm thinking, the reality is that one of the things I'm doing is trying to use philanthropy, to be honest, as the way to get that means, because I can't rely on the state to pay for anything, and I can't rely essentially on the university, and so I have to rely on what I'm doing internally. So I'm trying to think of ways about how I'm trying to get scholarships for students to keep those standards. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a concern that keeps us up at night all the time, and I think that's where your leadership at the chair level and the dean level has to be strong. And maybe the expectations of deans will change in the years to come, is that we will have to be certainly more entrepreneurial minded, not to be entrepreneurial just to make money, but to be entrepreneurial, to be able to bridge those gaps between quality, gap differences between underrepresented minorities, maintaining the standards that we have. I wish there was an easy answer for you, but that's certainly the challenge that's out there for us all to do as a team.
And Jamie, let me just say that Jasmine Ferrier and other members of
Yeah.
the committee raise this all the time in the meetings to make sure that we don't forget about it.
And that's why those
Yeah.
guiding principles, again, were developed there, is that we need to keep those by there, and that's kind of the expectation is we want to try to have our cake and eat it kind of thing, and it's a challenge with the financial position.
Okay, are there other questions? Thank you so much, guys, I
Thank you.
appreciate it. And look forward to seeing how this works out again. I just want to say, everybody on this committee is, I think, motivated by the exact same concerns about delivering the highest quality education that we can with the revenue streams that we have. And it's a difficult conversation for all of us. So, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
We'll come back and talk about politics next, right?
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Laura, the next two items are yours. Do you have a preference on which you do first?
Well, the Brent, we're not doing anything in Brandeis, we'll get all of that in writing by next
Okay.
meeting.
Sounds good. So you have an issue with respect to strategic planning that you wanted to raise with the faculty.
Well, I'd like to have at least, maybe 5 minutes of conversation about this. I'm on sabbatical next semester, so this is like my chance to get this on the plate. We have been working in the strategic planning and the faculty for 3.5 years on the rewards and incentives, trying to clarify what our values are, put it into a document. We've spent quite a bit of time on scholarship. We have kind of some frameworks on that. We're still working on the teaching because the issue of student evaluations and teaching is still being considered separately. But the issue of service is one that is on the charge for the strategic planning committee, which is very, very tiny this year. And the dean asked the Dean's Advisory Committee to talk a bit about it early in the semester and share their thoughts with me. But I bring it to you just to get some feedback, and if you want to send emails. But if you look on the agenda on the page that said rewards and incentives for teaching, or for service, I'm sorry. To me, service is very hard to measure. It's probably the hardest of the 3 things to measure, because we can tell how many courses we teach, how many hours, they're all hard. We can tell how many articles we write and so on. The service, if we just list, oh, you're on the X, Y, and Z committee, and so on, is very hard to evaluate what's that worth. So, especially in light of this faculty 180 input, I was even more reminded of how complicated it can be to report that information. And having been the dean that reads all these evaluations for 5 years, I can, if a faculty member describes well what they do, I was chair of the committee, we had 10 meetings and so on, and in detail, you can have a better sense of it if you just see a line item. There was some discussion, and I wasn't at the meeting with the Dean's Advisory Committee, discussed about having a grid or a template or a point value for every single thing, and I saw a couple of those models. I'm personally skeptical that everything can be given a numerical value. And I worry about how much time it would take to decide that if you're the chair of a committee, you get 5 points, if you're just a member, you get 3 points, if you meet 10 times. But that's kind of part of what I'd like to hear some thought about. But if we kind of need to decide what it is we value about service, to what degree is outside service displaced or allowed to displace your responsibilities in the committee, on your own law school committees. If you're doing all kinds of things outside of law school that are service, but you're not able to serve on the heavy lifting committees, how do we do that? And then how to ensure transparency. We talk every year about, we'll share everybody's work plans, and then we never decide to do that, and that's probably the right decision. But how do we not feel like somebody else is doing more than their share in the evaluation? So I just bring that to you for kind of discussion, and what to take back to the dean, because, and you might want to look at, this is what is currently asked by the dean about what faculty meeting did you go to, what did you do, and so on. And is that satisfactory? Do you feel like you're invited to share more specifics about what it is you did as part of that? How many meetings you have, how many hours, and so on? So that's, I just kind of throw it out for kind of 2 minutes or whatever, and feedback by email if you want also. Thoughts?
Sam?
My overarching thought is the idea that one kind of service inside the law school, on law school committees, campus versus community, the idea that we should have some hierarchy of that, I strongly oppose. I think service is service, and if you are offering it and doing it, whatever form it takes, as long as it conforms with the work plan that you work out, it should be valued, and one is not more valuable than another. Obviously, if you start doing other things, like, say, community service, or anything else for that matter, that interferes with your committee work, and in your work plan you said you were gonna be of service to a particular committee, then that's a problem. But that's a problem of effectively formulating the work plan at the outset, and then deviating from it in a way that's problematic. It seems to me that all those service that you mentioned should be valued, can go into a work plan, and none should be seen as better or than another, or somehow in a hierarchy. That's what I would say.
Can I ask you a question just to make sure I'm reporting back to the dean on this correctly? Are you suggesting so whatever service you get approved by the dean in your work plan should be valued as service regardless? There's no ranking in that.
And if it turns out that something changes in the middle of the year, you get an opportunity to ask, for example, to be on the transition team for the governor, right? The governor-elect. And that will affect your ability to render the service you said in your work plan. Go to the dean and amend the work plan. So there's ways to manage that if that kind of thing happens, but in and of itself, all service of whether it's community, campus, law school, to me, it's all service, and we should be valued.
Jim?
I have to leave because I have a review, so I'm saying this here. But if I were one of the many students who came to this meeting to be here, I would be profoundly mortified that the two biggest items we've discussed are how can faculty work one less day a week, and how are we going to reward and incentivize ourselves. So last meeting, I proposed that as part of the dean's report, there be an opportunity, and the context was that the diversity issues couldn't wait until there was a hire. And so the suggestion was we have to start somewhere, we have to do something, and somehow on this agenda, it got bifurcated out of the dean's report and bumped last. And so here we are at 2 o'clock, but I think all of us need to at least look and acknowledge that the student presence that came to at least hear what we were doing on diversity, and instead they heard us talk about our own rewards and incentives and how we can work one less day a week. I think that's sobering.
I appreciate your comments, and I know that we were going to get to it. I'm sorry that things took longer. I didn't realize how long the economic budget presentation was going to take. They had actually said they were going to be here for an hour. I said, we have other things we need to get to, so I don't disagree with you. And if we want, we can move ahead and have a conversation about the remaining item on the agenda, but I see you're leaving.
I have a review, I said, because the meeting.
And I think it's going to take a lot more than 1 minute, and that would be, I think it would be wrong to leave it.
Right, which is why the proposal is to make it part of the dean's report, which comes first, so that students a week before exams didn't think of it.
Can I suggest that, can we, all these things are important, can we, Laura, is it okay if we email you our thoughts? And that way we can do the diversity thing right now, so at least the students can hear it, is that clear?
Okay, so the suggestion that was made at the last faculty meeting was to go around and identify people and ask them to speak, and then if they had nothing to say pass. I said to the dean that was not a format that I was comfortable with. It didn't feel like a way to positively build a community. So I thought that instead that what would be good is to have people speak about the good things that they're doing, and I offered to discuss those. However, I am also inviting people to talk about what they are doing, and so the dean gave me something to read, so I'm going to do that last if we have time. But invite people who emailed me to talking about the issues that they're working on. And if you're okay, I'd like to call on, Erin was the first person to actually email me, so I'd like to call on Erin first, if that's okay. Yeah.
So I emailed and said I recently attended a webinar on universal design and creating accessible documents. So I've been doing a lot of work on getting our website, not just on ADA compliance, but also really accessible to people with a range of needs. And it's been fascinating, and I found a whole bunch of really great tools out there, which I think are great. So if anyone's interested in any of that information, I'm happy to forward it around, send you links or local documents.
Thank you. Ariana?
Sure, so I have a lot to share, but I feel like we're under time pressure here. So I want to say to the students and to my colleagues that I try to personally educate myself ongoing. So for instance, I just had some learning about Cooperative Jackson, and they have the Ida B. Wells Plaza, and that gave me the opportunity to read about her and how heroic she was and how that was a kind of unsung. And I also was not familiar with the Jackson-Cush plan, so I went and read about the Jackson-Cush plan. I also heard from a union leader from the Electricians Union in Mexico, and just their amazing fight to keep their public utility from privatizing and retain their jobs. But then beyond that, I also try to support my colleagues and my students and my former students of color. And so I've lent emotional support to several students recently who have recently graduated. And then I try and have educational tools for class. And these aren't as recent, but I did relatively recently decide to use the singular they when I'm teaching, because I think it's more inclusive, and I think it's an easy thing that all of us could decide to do, is to use the singular they. And when I did have cultural competence training, which was now a while back, but it raised for me differences in perceptions of time and culture and time. And in the law school, we have a kind of European white Protestant culture of arrive on time, not a minute late, try and be there 10 minutes early, right? And in other cultures, they have a culture of we need to hang with people until we've given them the time they deserve, and if that makes us late for our next obligation, so be it. And so there's a real tension between anyone coming from that culture as a student into this culture, something I've tried to be much more aware of. And I mean, I am one who wishes that we could just have a retreat or a workshop or something and have the time we need to learn about these things.
Actually, I'd love to hear from Ms.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I did, sorry.
So I have a suggestion. Instead of going around the room and saying what you all have done, if we're gonna sit and talk, why don't we talk about things that you all are going to do to effectuate change? Because the sitting and talking about what you've done, giving yourselves pats on the back, that's great, but we're interested in moving forward and what's going to change.
I think that's okay. And I will pass that along to the dean so that he gets
And I think we welcome suggestions of what we.
Oh, yeah.
I would like, I know the dean had a town hall in Tulsa. I would like I would love the faculty to be educated by these student groups. I mean, I'm on the diversity committee, so I hear some things, but I think that that's, the students have a lot to say, and I think that it would really be a good idea for us to hear it as a faculty.
If I can kind of build off what she's saying, I'm so thankful that you guys are doing stuff to talk about what you're doing to make people feel more included, but talking about what we're doing isn't the problem. It's what we're not doing, and how students of color feel uncomfortable in these classrooms when professors are saying things, and we need to confront the professors that are saying stuff in a more constructive way instead of praising people, right? Because you guys are doing great things, but we need to really address the problem head on, and I think that would really make us feel more comfortable is specifically addressing the issues.
Well, I join with you. Okay, Sam?
I would just say both and. I think there is value in hearing from each other what we're doing, because if Ariana, for example, is doing some things that I haven't thought of, I can learn from that, and that can be a way that I can say, okay, that's what I'll do, among other things too. So I think there is value in hearing okay, this is what our colleagues are doing, but I also love the idea, as Nora suggests, of, okay, what are we going to do? So I would like maybe to have not bifurcated, but like each person, if we're willing to do this, come in with both. Here's what I've done that others might pick up on, and here's what I'm going to do. I think if we have both, I think that enriches the whole dialogue.
Is there another item? Seven.
Okay, I hope you take this the right way, and I'm just frustrated. So I'm just gonna do this calmly and get through it. So it's fine for us to go around and talk about what we're doing. It's fine for us to hear from students and say we need to do something. I feel like I do something every day, just getting up in the morning and coming in here as a free black man, the first full professor to be tenured here, and the school was started in 1846. Now, I don't say that to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying all of this so you'll understand. This is like show and tell diversity. We're sitting around. We don't have to talk about what we're doing. We're doing it. We're trying to hire a assistant dean for student affairs and diversity. If we want to do something, when we get that person in here, make sure we support that person. Also, and you know, Jamie isn't here, and so you could say I said this other system. I don't like the way that went down. I mean, it just like gets up and you know, you all aren't down enough, and you aren't radical enough, and you're not with diversity. The colleagues that are here are struggling, trying to make something happen. Boss, I already had this conversation with you. I'm not throwing you under the bus, but as faculty advisor of BOSA, I need to be informed so that I can engage and tell you so that the student organization is a self-determining organization and does not get caught into the cross currents of political activity underlying some faculty members' actions. That was totally annoying to me and ultimately frustrating. And so if you want to have this dialogue, let's have the dialogue. But you show and tell, no, that's not what we're doing. When this student, the assistant dean for student affairs and diversity comes in, support them. If there are faculty who are saying inappropriate things, don't talk about the First Amendment and senior status and all. You remember how the other thing went down, and there's still some bruises about that. You know, we can go into that, the N-word in the classroom. The African American faculty wrote a letter about it, and it circulates through the faculty like we're bullying that faculty member when we're trying to be critical and assess the climate. And everyone talks about First Amendment, everyone remains silent, everyone looked the other way. And these problems are still underlying and circulate. So if it sounds like I'm angry, I am. I just think that we need to approach this more intellectually honest on every level. Students, I understand that you're in this struggle, but you have to be fully informed before you decide to advocate, before you decide to march. Faculty members, stand up. Those who are not with us, they're not with us. That's fine. But they cannot get into the way of this climate of diversity and what we're trying to do. You have to have the courage, particularly in these times. And everyone talks about student organizations and how great they are. They are great. But some of these student organizations are filling a vacuum and reflecting what's happening out in society. So if you want to do something, boss, or you want to do something in American Constitutional Society, push back into the vacuum that's been created by our inactivity. It's not enough for us to just point and say you did this for diversity, you did that for diversity. Actually do something and back people up. That's what it's about.
And I'd just like to add to that, you know, we also have been talking about institutional commitment, and the institutional commitment can't begin and end with hiring an assistant dean of diversity, because we cannot lay our climate on that person's lap and put it on their desk as the first thing to fix. It requires the institution, all of us, whatever we're doing, but the administration to take ownership and do some things. And so, you know, all of those, the list is long. We talked about them ad nauseum in several faculty meetings, and so there's more to be done, and that commitment needs to be made explicit, and we need to see something happen beyond just talking about what we're doing that's good.
conversation. What y'all have done is helpful, minimal, but helpful. What you guys do to diversify your own mentality, that's a good thing. But we're in a world of lack. Coming from an underrepresented community, I'm in a world of lack. And so what we need from you all is to be brought up to speed, which we need is a relationship. There's a wall of division into which we're wanting to get you all seats. Not take your place, but get you all seats, get an opportunity to be advanced to where we want to be. Don't give a damn that you don't have the same ideas. I want to learn from you. We need to learn from you. And so the opportunity is to be with you, to spend time with you. So as professors and faculty and deans, you gotta break the wall down. Otherwise, you have us leaning on a person who's gonna be heavily weighted as an assistant dean of diversity and student affairs, which is way too much weight for one person to carry, already in a war of faculty or staff versus students. So please break the wall down. Bring us in. We're different. We're not your average American per se, whatever you want to call it. Bring us in. Take a shot. Spend time with us. Have a retreat. Have whatever you guys want to call it. I want to be able to not only just, hey, come to my office. I'll do that. I will. Me individually. Some of us, you need to grab us. You got to go with a fish line and bring us in. You have to kind of corral us into your comfort zone because we're not comfortable. Extremely uncomfortable by what's going on. And that's already being a law student, whether black, Hispanic, Latino, whatever the case may be. We need to be corralled into it. And I don't want to put too much weight on y'all, but at the same time, we'll have to. I spent $65 to be here. Bring me in.
So, I agree with a lot of things Will spoke to. It's tough because I feel like to a certain extent we're preaching to the choir. There's so many people in this room that do amazing things. So if we did want to go around and talk about what people do, I mean, we'd be here all week, right? So it's tough, and we gotta at the same time reach out to you all because I know there's these opportunities, and we gotta, I guess, like he said, build a relationship again because somewhere it got broken, and there's no real trust, and so when something happens, now we're up in arms and we're not fully informed about certain things, so it's more yelling and then talking and then building a relationship. But again, it's not patting yourself on the back, but I think you guys do a lot, and you should be proud of what you do. And it's a complex situation. I mean, I'm black, Mexican, and white, and I can still offend people of my own race. I didn't even know I could. So it's really complex. There's a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of education that goes into it, and I'm learning, and it's just the community around us is turning so fast, and then, you know, there's a lag, but everyone in this room we look up to you as students. You guys are extremely high achieving, and so that we're that this school is lagging, because I know you guys wake up every day and try to be the best at what you do and spend your whole working life doing it, really. So we appreciate you and we thank you. We just want this school to be what y'all want to make it the best school in Kentucky and the best it can be, best school in the country, really. So that's really what we want to do.
Thank you. And I just want to add something that, as a background to sort of my reaction to the dean's email was, for a variety of reasons, I've participated in therapy over the last few years, and one of the things my wife reminded me yesterday was, this is an expression we learned, which was connection before correction. And the idea was, if you see people for who they are, you meet them where they are. Issues outside of your, I think you can actually achieve great things, right? So if you see people where they are in their space and meet them in that point, I think you can make great change. But it requires effort, and I 100% agree with that. And I think the one part about it was that I just can't do it. It's not me. I'm not going to call on people and ask them to take a pass so that they get embarrassed in front of the group. I understand sort of the motivation behind it, and it certainly can drive conversations and it can maybe get people to think about stuff. I think it is wonderful to have a conversation about with a person as an individual and make changes based on that. And so I feel terrible
you didn't. No,
That's,
just no way, no.
I'm happy to be here and to know that the students are angry with my approach and to know, to have reinforced what Cedric said, because, I mean, I saw this thing, I couldn't go because I had a conflict, but it was like, you made a mistake, you know, with your cultural competence, like, what do you do now? And like, I think that for me is really important. I value it when my students and colleagues, trust me enough to let me know, and I've had students who have trusted me enough. You totally goofed up that. You didn't, you know, consider this perspective, and I want that. So, and I don't think that anybody's responsible for our situation.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I guess it felt a little bit like that, Cedric, because I'm the one who sent the email, so I got the emails back. But that being said, these are important issues, and I don't think anybody in this room, we appreciate that they are important issues. And I am 100% in agreement that we can always do better. And that is not a bad thing to keep in mind, is that even if you haven't achieved where you want to be now, you can always do better, you can always make things better. And that's a good value, and I think at least everybody in the room now is sitting here saying, we agree with you 100%. So, yeah, Monica.
I mean, I just want to say that I think, with some exceptions, I know a lot of people aren't here, for the most part, I've had almost everyone in here as a professor, and I would say that I've always felt welcomed by the people in here, and I think we are all in a general consensus that it's usually the people who aren't here who are the source of the problem, and everyone goofs up and makes mistakes, but if something were said in, let's say, Professor Powell's class, Marston's, Rothstein's, I don't think I would ever have an issue or feel uncomfortable bringing that to them. I think if another professor who isn't here says something, someone in class says something that's not addressed, I think there are some professors that we as a whole would never feel comfortable going to, which is why I think we need the Dean for Diversity. And I think that's going to be, you know, very helpful. But I don't think anybody in here is at fault, source of a problem. I think for the most part, everyone who's here, we all feel like is here for us. And it's usually the professors who don't care to listen about our issues that are the source of the problem. So.
And let me say, so I'm the Associate Dean of Faculty, and I will absolutely, you can feel confident, you can come and tell me in confidence anything that you have experienced that is upsetting to you. When we have a new Dean of Students that comes in, that person will be available to hear these things. When Jennifer DeSanza was here, she and I talk all the time about issues that were being raised by students, about things that were making them uncomfortable in the classroom. And while we didn't announce what we were doing to deal with it, we were trying to take into account people wanting things to be done in confidence. But as much as possible, I think people need to be aware that they have the right to come and talk to us. And I think, and I want to speak for the Dean, I mean, I hate to speak for the Dean about this, but I feel like this is an issue that he cares about deeply too. And I know he's very sorry that he wasn't here to do this. As I explained at the beginning of the meeting, the opportunity to meet with the legislators who finance higher education and to be with the president of our university, I thought was an important thing for him to do. So I think Nina didn't want to say something.
One quick comment. Those conversations, not to reveal any confidences, but that's the kind of reporting back that I think our students demanded last year, right? So that we know what are the issues that are coming up in other classrooms that I don't know exactly what's going on. And so just as we report on basic honor code concerns, not individual cases ever, we can have this kind of reporting, and I think the Dean committed to doing that last year, and it's yet to happen. So that's...
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we find ourselves in a situation where we're getting short-staffed at the administrative level, and that, of course, has caused us not to be able to do as much as we want to. And the interesting thing is, I think we will find that obviously being uncomfortable in the classroom is one thing that people complain about, but it's not the only thing. So there are a lot of things we can report out to the students as a general matter. We're seeing these issues, and we should be aware of them and deal with them.
I'd love to know those.
Yeah, exactly.
But, and I understand the short staff thing, but it sounds like this is something we've got to do. We must do, so we need to make it a priority.
Yeah.
I can tell people are hurting.
No. Sorry.
Well, as a fake Dean DeSanza for this semester, listening to them often is what is the most important thing. And sometimes they really just want to be heard, and it varies. There's so many different situations that arise. Sometimes they just want to be heard and have somebody to come to. Sometimes they want an interlocutor, somebody who will go to the source of what they perceive to be the problem. And sometimes they want systemic change. And there's no one answer. Every situation that I've encountered in just this one almost full semester has been completely different from one another. And I would never want to generalize about that. And what I have at least tried to do is to be really sensitive to the fact that I may be encountering something that's different from the thing I encountered last week. And there would be some things I wouldn't ever want to report because A, it wouldn't be what the student had wanted from me. And then there would be others that I have tried to move up the food chain.
Yeah.
So it's so important in my mind to be specific, to be very specific, responding very specifically to what you're encountering.
Yeah, and I don't want to minimize, and I think Sam would agree with me about this. I don't want to minimize the issues of diversity and inclusion that are top of mind for all of us in the administration. We care about this stuff a lot, and we're thinking about it all the time. You know, I wish we had somebody in the role as assistant dean right now because we've been overwhelmed. Those of us who are left trying to handle all of those issues. And hopefully, knock wood, thank you to the committee that is doing the search. We will have somebody in that role, and it will be an expanded role and a much needed change. So hopefully that will go on. Laura.
Well, and it's unfortunate we talk more about the boards and incentives because it wasn't intended as a way to talk about ways to pat ourselves on the back. I feel like a lot of faculty do things that relate to diversity and community engagement, and I want those to be valued, and I want us to talk about why they should be valued and how those matter in the annual review.
Yeah.
So that was really behind, in addition to other things, about how do we tell our story so that those things get valued and matter.
And if you don't count, I mean, in a system that has metrics, if you don't count it, you don't value it, right? That's the reality. So if we're going to say we care about something, they care a lot about community engagement. They put it in the Faculty 180 plan, but as somebody pointed out, they didn't have a category for diversity.
You know,
And so we pointed that
and I'm
out
the
to
one
Tracy
that goes
Ellis.
and finds all that, and we do a lot, but.
Yeah, it's like if you value it, then they have people report about it, so we know what's going on. But, so those are the kind of systemic issues that I think hopefully we're dealing with. We're moving forward, but it's not a perfectly straight line. That is very clear. So, and I'm sorry that it got left to. I mean, I was hoping that I looked at the agenda and I thought the meeting was going to be quick. And I mean, like we'd have a ton of time to talk about these issues. So that was on the. I didn't realize that it was going to be such a long budget discussion.
Office hours, like Sam's next week?
Yes. Thank you. Motion to adjourn? Second?